Welcome everybody to our session 2 of the Academy Symposium. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal clan of the Eora people that we're meeting on today, and also to thank Auntie Rhonda for that wonderful introduction today. Before I go too much further, I might quickly introduce myself, because you'll probably realise that I'm not the person who was going to be chairing this wonderful session. Unfortunately, Brenda Croft can't be with us today, so I'm stepping in. I'm Victoria Haskins. I am a member of the Council of the Academy of Humanities and a historian. I come from Moolabinba, which is the sea ferns place, otherwise known as Newcastle. That's where I currently live. I'm non-Indigenous. I am the proud mother of Gomeroi and Worimi boys, and I've been working on histories of Indigenous cross-cultural relations for a long time. And this panel was one that I was particularly looking forward to. So I find myself on stage with wonderful speakers and really looking forward to the session today. And what I'm going to do is introduce everybody first, and then we'll have the speakers go through their presentations, and then we'll have the questions at the end. So as you're listening and you have questions in mind, just make a note of them for when we come to the end. So going in order of our stage, I'll start by introducing, excuse my papers here, Dr. Trina Clark. So Trina's a Kolkata and Wurrungu researcher. Hope I pronounced that okay. She's an Indigenous Research Fellow at UTS, and she'll be talking about her project addressing indigeneity, identity, healing and social change through clothing, fashion and style in urban environments, and she'll be giving a talk that's based from that research project. And then next in our lineup, we've got Nathan Mundia Sentence. Now, Nathan's the head of the First Nations collections at the Powerhouse Museum. He's a Wiradjuri man, and he'll be talking about how he goes about creating space for First Nations communities to critique and challenge colonial practices, I suppose, in the museum, how to talk back. And then we've got a couple presenting, Dahlia Pigram and Rachel Swain, sorry, that's my terrible handwriting. And they've both recently been inducted into the Australian Academy of Humanities yesterday, so congratulations. Now, are you both directors of, co-directors of Maranggeku? Yeah. So Dahlia, trying to get to through my handwriting. Dahlia Pigram's a Yarrawu, a Bardi woman, movement artist from Broome, and Rachel Shaw is also... yeah, not from Broome. Not from Broome. It lives in Sydney, actually, yes. So they're going to be talking today about collaborative performances of truth-telling through dance, yes. So really looking forward to that. Now, the forum as a whole is about considering sustainable cultural practices and Indigenous governance around managing cultural material in ethical ways, which is, of course, at the front of mind and importance in the things that we're doing today. So I will hand over now to Nathan, who's going to start.
I'd just like to begin by also thanking Auntie Rhonda for the welcome this morning, and to say Yiradu Naramang Nindugi Nathan Sense Iwanati Raja Gibi Baladu Yindamalaja Gadago Nurambangu Yindamalaja Gadago Mujigangu Yindamalaja Nadi Mujigangu. I'd just like to, pay my respects to Gadigal people, Gadigal elders, and to acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded to invaders, and to try my best to be a respectful visitor while I'm here on these lands and getting to present with all of you on these lands, and to state that I guess in my role as head of collections First Nations at the Powerhouse, I'm trying my best to not just acknowledge country with my words, but to make the ways that we work with museum collections honour country with our actions. And I'm hoping the stuff I'll yarn to today is a reflection of us trying to, honour country and honour different Indigenous mobs, unceded sovereignty and connection to that country and to their cultural heritage. I'll start with myself. I love starting with a positionality statement because I feel like it's close to how mob introduce themselves anyway, like who's your mob, where you're from. But I also do it because I'm a librarian by trade, and when I was studying to be a librarian, we were told that one of the most important things that a librarian should be, and it continues into museum practice as well, is to be neutral. And I actually don't believe that libraries, archives, and museums have ever been neutral. And I also think that, everyone in museums and libraries, even when they try to be objective, are influenced by, the culture of the world, government policies, all these sort of things that are not neutral. So rather than pretend to be neutral, I will sort of just state who I am and put my biases on my sleeves. So you can sort of hear them for you and make up your own mind. But I'm Nathan Mudji Sentence. I'm a Wiradjuri man. My family's traditionally from Mudji, New South Wales, but I grew up on Darkinjung country on the New South Wales Central Coast, where my dad was involved in establishing the Eleanor Duncan Aboriginal Medical Service, which is now called URAN. And my first job was at the Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council as an assistant archivist. And since then, I've been working in libraries and archives for next year would be my 20th year working in archives. And my first job, I was very lucky, was to work at after this Darkinjung Land Council, was to work at the State Library here on Gadigal country, which is the oldest library, colonial library in Australia. And I got to work there under the mentorship of Ronald Briggs and Melissa Jackson, who have been Indigenous librarians at the State Library since 1991. And they were very generous in their mentorship. But I guess it was like one of the things that sort of very much influenced my view of libraries was an experience I had very early in my State Library days where when community would come into the State Library to do things like family history research, language revitalisation, Ronald and Melissa would always be sort of in charge of that. And they would be very good and always invite me along so I could meet with community as well. And I just remember one day we actually have, we don't have I guess like the mission records, but we actually have a lot of missionary diaries in the State Library collection. And I remember one auntie reading a missionary diary, and it said that she broke her arm, and she was like, "Hey, that's me," and she got really excited. But then she read that it said she needed additional medical care because she broke her arm, and she was like, "Hey, I've never broken my arm in my life. This is false. I'll get an X-ray today to prove it." And to me, I was like, it sort of clicked something that. Well, the discrepancy between Arnie's lived experience and the written record in that case, you could argue is like an innocuous discrepancy. But it does solidify that Arnie's lived experience is not in the State Library collection, and that written record is. And that written record is what people use to write, I guess, the official narrative of New South Wales and Australian history. It's where Thomas Keneally went to write Schindler's List, is the State Library. So that's why I think that it's so important to sort of question whose truth are in these collections and whose truth is absence. And that's sort of been the focus of my work ever since, and to sort of, try and combat what there's an archivist named, American archivist named Michelle Caswell, who had this term symbolic annihilation, and she was saying that if there's certain communities that aren't represented, or definitely not represented from their own perspective, then they're in essence being symbolically annihilated from the official record. And so I guess that's what I've been trying to fight. So from there I've been working at, I got to work at the State Library, the Australian Museum, and now I'm very lucky to be at the Powerhouse Museum. I just need to work at the Art Gallery and the MCA, and I've done it. But for those who don't know about the Powerhouse, we run 4 sites. Powerhouse Parramatta is going to be open next year. Powerhouse Ultimo is being refurbished, hopefully should open in 2027. We run Powerhouse Castle Hill, and we also run the Sydney Observatory. And we have a collection over 500,000 objects. But in saying that, before I started, one of my colleagues who's really deadly, Tammy Giselle, along with Madeline Pohl and Marika Penrith and Jeremy Arbron, actually got to audit the collection. So they got to audit the collection as part of it having to move from Ultimo to Powerhouse Castle Hill. And they clocked everything that had Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, anything that was related to mob. And basically this is what we found. So it was roughly around a little bit over 4,000 objects that relate to mob. But when we really drilled down to it, only about 1,300 were actually made by the hearts, hands and mind of mob. So it works out about 0.03% of the collection in total is made by mob. So you can sort of see that, again, it's that sort of thing where our perspectives are lacking from the collection. You know, for example, we have an incredible transport history at the Powerhouse, but it doesn't speak to the fact that, in New South Wales, mob were, a lot of the people putting down those train tracks and things of that nature. Those perspectives are missing. And as you can see from this list, we have what we call First Nations representations, which are like photographs of mob taken by non-Indigenous photographers, or, we have a lot of design, and Aboriginal people featured a lot on design. So, they might be like a tea set with like, an emu, a kangaroo, and a blackfella, and a boomerang, So we're as you can see, we're represented more by non-Indigenous people than we are represented by our own selves telling our own stories. So I guess that is one of the things we're trying to rectify as part of the First Nations Directorate that I am in, led by Bo James. But I'm also part of this group called the Indigenous Archives Collective, which was founded by Dr. Kirsten Thorpe, who's at UTS in Jumbana, and Dr. Shannon Forkhead, who's at, I think, Melbourne Museum. They founded it in, I think, 2011, and in 2018 it got re-established as the Indigenous Archives Collective, which, as I was saying, which I'm a part of. And from all of our conversations as people who have used archives and people who work in archives, we released a statement in 2019, a position statement on the Indigenous right-of-reply. And for those who haven't heard the term right-of-reply before, many of you probably have, but it's like it's a journalistic term. It's like if you write something disparaging about someone in a newspaper, it's usually journalistic ethics to allow them to respond in the same medium that you're talking to them, whether it be a rebuttal article or in the same article. We believe that actually mob actually have that right to the official record because so much has been written about us, without us, that it's our right to be able to correct and challenge that record. And that doesn't mean to, I guess, delete the original record. Like if for that example with Arnie, that's not to say that we wouldn't keep the missionary's diary entry. It would just mean that we haven't something to go along with it so other people in the future can make up their own mind and see both truths or multiple truths. And these are the key principles of the right to reply. You can't have the right to reply without the right to know. You can't respond to something that you don't know exists, which is something that museums need to sort of work on more, as a lot of people don't actually know what's in museum collections, especially a lot of mob. And cultural safety is important because you actually, to respond to, you also have to feel safe in entering those spaces and engaging with that material. They're the sort of key principles, and it's something that, as I was saying, we sort of worked on it in 2019. So I started at the museum, the Powerhouse Museum, in 2022. And one of the things I was really keen to sort of be part of this new team was like, let's do the right of reply. And I guess I was always thinking about it in terms of correcting our records, challenging and adding information to our metadata of our objects. And this is something that we've done ourselves, like, you know, this is a record now of like a very poorly provenanced object. One of the things we did change with it was it used to say maker unknown, and I've always hated that terminology because I feel like the maker wasn't unknown. No one bothered to sort of record it or care to sort of capture it. So anyway, we changed it to ancestor not yet recorded to show that it actually has living descendants now. The connection's ongoing. And also too, we wanted to add not recorded to sort of put the emphasis back on the museum, saying it's not unknown, we just haven't recorded it. And then we decided to, actually on the advice of a Maori scholar who came and visited our collection, Narino Ellis from Auckland University, she's like, you should put yet in there because you should be aspirational and think that you can record it in the future. So that's how we've done it. So that's what we do with our provenance material. But with our more provenance material, and this is probably standard across libraries, archives, and museums, but it wasn't for the Powerhouse. We make it that with any First Nations object, when we can, in the significance statement, the first thing that you see is a quote from the artist or a community representative. So it may still have, you know, a curator interpretation, but the first thing you see is the voice of the community. But that leads me to this project that we're still working on at the moment, which there's these postcards from Charles Carey, where the story I was told was he was in Quambone Station. He heard that there was a men's ceremony happening, and he ran over to take photos of the men's ceremony. He missed it, but the men were still painted up. They still had their carvings on the ground, and he asked if they could pose for him so he could take photos, which later became postcards, which have been published many places. They're very remarkable. It's from 1898. Anyway, when we came across these in the digitization project, we paused for a second and said, wait a second, should these even be online? We found out that in 1999, the Powerhouse actually did do community consultation with a lot of Wailwan elders, and they actually made an education kit around them, made by sort of non-Indigenous educators, but it was working with community. So I was like, well, they've already done this consultation, but we should probably reach out again and see, because that's been 25 years, there might be community sentiment change. And there was a lot of community that sort of said, you know, initially we were proud of these photos, but now they're being used a lot everywhere and we're worried about how they're being used. And so basically what we did was I asked the community, well, can we have a yarn about if these should be private or not? And if they're not private, can we have a yarn about you interpreting them and you having that right of reply? And what the community said was, that's not that interesting to us. They basically said, what we want to do is we actually want to take new photos now to show that we're still a living culture, because they were like, that's the issue that they were mostly facing, is that the way that these photos were used and talked about, usually past tensism, and they, yeah, you know, they feel empowered from them, but they didn't feel like, you know, it's sort of connected to their like living reality today. So that was a sort of like a big, and I guess it's quite obvious, but like I guess this was a thing where I was like expanding what the right of reply could be, rather than just sort of an informational response. It should be a creative response. And that's sort of what they did. So this is one of the original photos, and this is them having a cultural camp. So we funded them to host 2 cultural camps, one in autumn, one in spring, so they could go on country and teach language, song, you know, weapon making. One of the camps they taught how to hunt and cook emu. It was a way for them to pass their knowledge down to the next generation. But also too, they took, at both camps, they took about 1,000 photos, which then got whittled down to 50 that will come to the Powerhouse. And so here are just a couple of them. So as I was saying, that sort of just really inspired my practice, and now we're thinking more in terms of how we can more creatively allow people to correct and challenge records. And so we've actually now established the First Nations Writer-Applied Photography Commission, because again, we have all these great photographs in our collection, but only until just recently, we've only had 2 black photographers in our collection, Professor Fiona Foley and Uncle Mervyn Bishop. So we're going to try and change that. So we're, this was announced last year, and Joanne Drisden was the first one, and she's working on building a camera out of country. That's her proposal, but we're going to hopefully in a couple of weeks announce the second EOI. So if you know any incredible First Nations photographers that want to respond to the collection, and it doesn't actually have to be just responding to the photography collection. If they're into fashion, if they're into automobiles, whatever they want to engage with is their opportunity too. And then lastly, I won't go into this because I've run out of time, but one of the things we're also working on is working with, and also I should apologise before I click the slide. This is just a warning. This is like a tool that was used as part of, I guess, racist pseudoscience, like the sort of part of the sort of eugenics movement. So Dr. Lauren Booker, who actually works here at UTS as well at Jumbana, wanted to research these collections because she's been researching this for a very long time, these sort of tools of racist pseudoscience. And she is going to correct our records. Our records were, pretty good, but she's going to actually add more meat to it, more truth-telling. But again, she didn't want to just be limited to writing, because she was saying that she's written about this stuff a lot, and a lot of people have written about this stuff a lot, and it hasn't really seeped through that the fact that this material still echoes to today, even though it's, a completely debunked science, there's still elements of it that are still permeate our culture. So what she did, and because she's a musician, she actually played this. So she got soft mallets and played them, and then also looked at how it would actually be used, and sort of moved pieces and mic'd it up to hear what would actually be the sounds of these tools to make it a bit more felt, I guess. And one of the things she did was I'm going to make this an iterative process, and she's invited people to sort of work with her to respond to it. And I was lucky enough to be one of the people, because I was facilitating this as part of my role at the Powerhouse, but also in my spare time, I'm a poet. So I've actually created a poem in response to the work that she's done, which I don't have time to play. So I'll just skip it, but I'll release it to the world some way in the future. But this quote by Lauren Booker, I think, is pretty important, because I just think that, and also too, Mob have been doing this for ages. So even though it's I've sort of come at a very different way because I've been a person working in institutions, I think it is that sort of thing that there's all these mob who are going to keep challenging and correcting the records, these incredible Indigenous artists, and it's our role to sort of just make sure the collections that we can support it and just get out of the way and make sure these collections are available for community to do truth-telling. So I'm Mandinguru, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Oh, thanks. Hi, everyone. Before I begin, I would also like to thank Ani Rhonda for the welcome, and also acknowledge Gadigal traditional owners and elders past, present. I also want to acknowledge the knowledge holders across Tandanya, Warrane and Naarm, whose words, generosity and wisdom shape everything I'm about to share. As a disclaimer and warning to First Nations peoples, this presentation contains images of deceased people. So my name's Trina. I'm a Chancellor's Indigenous Research Fellow at the University of Technology, Sydney, a position which I'm finalising in a month's time. I am Gugutha and Wurrungu on my mum's side. On my dad's side, I have connections to Warlpiri, Gurindji and Yakanjara mobs. Today I'm wearing my dad's old sports top from the 1980s. It's old and worn, but it carries the story of his rugby days in Adelaide. The fact that it is a cultural item from the 1980s also means so much to me. I'm also wearing a sapphire ring he once gifted my mum, and on the other hand, I'm wearing an opal ring from my grandmother, my dad's mother. And around my neck, an opal boomerang necklace from my grandfather, my mother's father. These three important people in my life have passed, but I constantly feel their presence and their love. I also constantly feel connected to my culture with my permanent adornment in the form of an Aboriginal flag tattooed on my arm. Every piece I'm wearing carries a history, a connection, a memory. They're how I carry my family and culture with me every day. First Nations clothing and adornment have always held deep cultural meanings, with garments serving as visual stories of identity, country, and community. Many of these forms of clothing and adornment were personalised with designs and symbols that represented cultural identity, status, ceremony, milestones, and relationships. From the moment of invasion, clothing was used to erase cultural presence. Traditional dress was banned, cloak making criminalised, and Western attire forced upon communities as a form of control. But resistance never stopped. Today we're seeing a wave of designers, artists and community members reclaiming dress as an act of survival, empowerment and self-determination. First Nations clothing and adornment continue to be a channel of storytelling, whether in ancestral or contemporary forms. This presentation isn't about fashion design, it's about the wearers. The research shows how cultural knowledge is embodied, remembered and shared, especially in urban spaces. This research also highlights how Indigenous methodologies centred on listening, reciprocity and care enable a respectful engagement with First Nations lived experience. This work is grounded in First Nations principles of reciprocity, collaboration and care. The research is informed by First Nations ethical guidelines of research and Indigenous research methodologies, along with the broader frameworks of decolonisation and First Nations social and emotional wellbeing. These methodologies and frameworks affirm that First Nations ways of knowing are vital to reshaping the future of research, representation, and fashion itself. The project has been guided and strengthened through consultation with family members and supported by an advisory group who have provided ongoing advice, suggestions, and connections. I've also presented the research to traditional owner groups and local councils in each of the cities for feedback and support. The knowledge holders themselves have also helped inform this research through consent, support, and collaborative participation. The data collection methods were chosen to align with Indigenous research methodologies, which drew on archival research, yarning interviews, and thematic analysis. As an Aboriginal person who has lived in both Adelaide and Sydney, I bring my own experiences as an urban person who shares these same relationships with fashion and culture. That positionality shapes how I listen, interpret, and share these stories. So I spoke with 27 knowledge holders across 3 cities, Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney, about fashion, identity, resistance and cultural revitalisation, and how these practices foster connection, resilience and healing. I asked elders, activists and community members about what they wear to protests and cultural events, how fashion supports wellbeing and healing, and the memories they carry about First Nations clothing and adornment over time. Every yarn was different, but the threads of continuity and care were constant. All knowledge holders were given gift cards in recognition of their time, knowledge and contributions. Knowledge holders had the opportunity to review, revise and approve their transcripts. They were also contacted post-yarning interview to discuss how their stories were translated into publications to assure accuracy and cultural integrity and options of co-authorship. To protect their privacy, all knowledge holders have been de-identified and no descriptive information applied that could reveal their identities. As outlined in the information and consent forms provided to the knowledge holders, they can opt out of the study at any time or engage with as much or as little as they want. The overall analysis revealed 6 major themes across a spectrum of styles, experiences and encounters wearing First Nations fashion. These include community, belonging, identity, buying, representation, concepts, history, continuity, disruption and safety. Codes from 4 of these overall themes were gathered to share insights into cultural sustainability and the continuation of culture through clothing and adornment. The first theme that emerged from the yarns was around memory, how knowledge holders remember and talk about clothing across generations. Many of the knowledge holders spoke about traditional wear, forced garments like blankets and mission clothing, and the evolving forms of protest wear that came later. Stories about mission clothing were especially powerful. As the stories moved into the mid to late 20th century, people talked about handmade and second-hand clothes, performance outfits, and the emergence of the formal kind of dress of the quiet resistance type. One knowledge holder spoke about generational change, how their parents and grandparents once avoided wearing the colours of the Aboriginal flag. For many, the rise of First Nations clothing is deeply emotional because for some, these garments simply didn't exist when they were younger. What came through strongly was how remembering clothing from mission days to modern start helps sustain cultural identity. The second theme explored where inspiration comes from and how knowledge holders navigate the complex space of expressing identity through fashion. The experiences they spoke about were diverse. Some drew inspiration from contemporary First Nations fashion events, art and design, while others were guided by family style. Family and kinship came through again and again. People talked about dressing like their parents or grandparents, underscoring how clothing acts as a medium for intergenerational connection. One knowledge holder described drawing from their own nation's art and motifs, and another around carefully navigating cultural boundaries of design from other First Nations groups. For these knowledge holders, respecting cultural rules was integral to feeling comfortable and authentic in their fashion choices. Community itself was another huge source of inspiration. People noticed and admired others wearing First Nations designed clothing and jewellery and then went searching for those same pieces. But it wasn't always simple. Some knowledge holders yarned about feeling ambivalence or discomfort around wearing visibly First Nations designs or flag colours in public. Altogether, what to wear, what not to wear becomes a careful balancing act between pride, cultural integrity and historical experience. The third theme looks at how First Nations people engage with fashion and adornment in their everyday lives, what they wear, why they wear it and the meanings those choices carry. Many wear ceremonial or traditionally inspired adornments alongside contemporary looks, weaving or handcrafted jewellery that connects them directly to country and culture. Knowledge holders wear First Nations items such as hoodies, t-shirts, guernseys and tracksuits. Others prefer subtle expressions such as small earrings, pins, badges or patches. Common motifs include the Aboriginal flag, native title messages and references to black musicians. Other styles incorporate cultural artworks and designs from their own or other nations. People spoke about the brands they love. Some even create their own designs because the clothes they want aren't always available or accessible. Knowledge holders wear these pieces to work, the shops, graduations, protests, cultural events, and even overseas. But they also talked about context and safety, sometimes choosing to wear visibly First Nations fashion only around community or in spaces that feel safe and supportive. So the last theme centres on the profound meaning of wearing First Nations clothing, not just as fashion but as cultural practice. Many knowledge holders describe clothing and adornments as acts that reaffirm identity in visible and deeply meaningful ways. Wearing First Nations garments allows them to publicly and proudly celebrate who they are. One knowledge holder spoke about ceremonial regalia, how wearing it strengthens their spirit and contributes directly to their well-being. Many of the knowledge holders spoke of these garments as transformative tools that sustain cultural connection. One knowledge holder reflected that First Nations fashion strengthens well-being and reinforces their Aboriginality and sense of belonging. For those who travel frequently or live away from country, First Nations clothing serves as a vital link to culture. Even in urban spaces, wearing cultural garments can be a deliberate act of resilience and visibility, especially in places where it may not always feel safe. Across all contexts, these garments are more than clothing. They are tangible expressions of identity, pride and belonging, linking individuals to their community, their culture and their country. For generations, clothing has been a vital form of a cultural expression through which First Nations peoples have sustained identity, asserted sovereignty and resisted assimilation. From early adornment and weaving practices to the adaptation of new materials during colonisation, fashion has functioned as a site of negotiation and survival. Today, ceremonial garments, woven adornments and jewellery made from ancestral methods and materials remain integral to cultural practice and well-being for the knowledge holders. Everyday items such as shirts, hoodies and accessories bearing First Nations symbols continue this tradition, transforming fashion into a living archive of resilience and pride. Small acts of adornment, including badges and brooches, have long symbolised belonging and resilience and resistance, linking past and present expression of identity. The Aboriginal flag, introduced in 1971, remains a powerful emblem of unity and cultural continuity, widely incorporated into community and designer fashion alike. Community-made garments continue to be created and worn today. In earlier decades, much of this clothing was handmade or community-produced. A common form of First Nations style today are community merchandise shirts, which are widely distributed by First Nations organisations and often freely given. For many, wearing these garments within urban and community spaces fosters safety, visibility and solidarity. First Nations clothing remains a way to express culture and political rights, though now it intersects with new generations and broader movements for representation. Ultimately, across time and place, First Nations fashion expresses continuity, creativity and connection to country, embodying a living narrative of identity and collective resilience. First Nations fashion acts as a living form of cultural learning, transmission and remembrance. Through the making, wearing and storytelling of garments, knowledge holders connect past experiences of restriction with present expressions of autonomy and pride. Clothing, whether traditional, mission era, protest or contemporary, functions as both historical record and evolving practice, reflecting identity, resistance and cultural resilience. Knowledge holders described how engaging with traditional and modern garments strengthens well-being and community connection. Making and wearing clothing are intertwined acts that carry ancestral knowledge, support healing and reinforce intergenerational ties. Storytelling plays a crucial role in these processes, as sharing memories of ancestral clothing, family attire and protest wear becomes a form of cultural reclamation and truth-telling. First Nations artists engage in this work, highlighting the real histories and impacts on First Nations people through clothing and adornment. Learning about history and knowledge transmission are aspects of cultural practice that contribute to well-being. One knowledge holder mentioned the impact that making animal skin cloaks has on well-being, especially the collective acts of both making and learning about the history of First Nations clothing. Workshops, exhibitions and creative collaborations were seen as vital to sustaining these practices. Making garments such as skin cloaks, woven adornments or clothing using native materials fosters belonging and continuity and collective well-being. Ultimately, First Nations fashion is more than aesthetic expression. It is a medium for teaching, remembering and sustaining culture. Through creative practice and everyday wear, it continues to transmit knowledge, celebrate resilience and connect communities across generations. This research explores cultural sustainability through the wearing of clothing and adornment. First Nations fashion sustains cultural practice and knowledge, community connections and well-being, particularly in urban spaces where it represents adaptation and resilience. The research shows Indigenous-led collaborative approaches and how it has been applied to First Nations clothing and adornment practices. By centring the lived experience of First Nations wearers, this research demonstrates how clothing and adornment operate as living archives, sustaining memory, identity and culture. Knowledge translations of these findings include short articles, detailed journal papers and book chapters. The stories shared by knowledge holders form the foundation of this research and inform the interpretation of findings, contributing to our understanding of how clothing and adornment impact First Nations wellbeing. There are limitations, of course, as these findings are preliminary and, foundational and primarily urban-based, with a strong representation of older female Aboriginal knowledge holders, and they reveal the importance of including diverse genders, sexualities, Torres Strait Islander voices, and regional and remote perspectives in future research. These gaps point to important directions for future research to link with broader conversations on First Nations fashion and identity. These intersecting voices, stories and experiences are invaluable to further understanding the positive effects of clothing and adornment on cultural practice and well-being. Before I conclude, I would like to thank all the knowledge holders who generously shared their time, stories and perspectives. Their experiences form the heart of this research. My gratitude also goes to the advisory group, traditional owners, local councils and community members for their guidance and support throughout this project. Thank you to my good friend Shannon, who allowed me to use photos of her and her family. And finally, I extend my thanks to my supervisor and convener of this symposium, Distinguished Professor Peter McNeil, for his guidance and mentorship. Thank you.
We'd like to start on behalf of all of Marikaku. We'd like to pay our respects and are grateful to be here on the lands of the Gadigal. We're sad to have missed the welcome this morning in a place that has supported the abundance of life over time. We pay our respects to the custodians of this beautiful country that has endured so much change and thank them for holding knowledge and maintaining care for their future leaders. Ngaji Gurjan, Ngayon alwal Dalia Pigrom, Ngayu Ngambala Nyaro Ngain Buru. I'm Dalia Pigrom, and I introduce myself to you in the language of my people, the language of the land on which I was born, raised, and exist today. I am proud to be speaking my Yaro language and acknowledge my teachers of language and culture. I'm from a town called Broome, otherwise known by the custodians as Rubibi, in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. I'm also connected to the Bari people of the Dampier Peninsula, further north of Broome, and have Malay, Filipina, English and Irish heritage. For over 20 years, I've been teaching Yaro language at a local primary school, working with elders and language knowledge holders within my community. I've also been a movement artist and choreographer with Marrageku for 30 years, and I've been co-artistic director alongside Rachel Swain since 2008. Marrageku is an intercultural dance theatre company committed to finding a more truthful reflection of our country's story, which values the perspectives of its First Peoples while taking responsibility for each other. I am of Banaga skin, and I would like to speak a little bit to the place that I was raised. My movement language and choreographic methods are informed by the place that I grew up and learned how to walk, learned on the reef, in the mud, in the mangroves, on the Pindan, at the edge of the desert that meets the sea. These are things that I carry with me in my practice as a movement artist and will continue to forevermore. Broome was exempt from what is known as the White Australia policy, so the history of the place that has a little bit of a unique take on its interactions with other cultures is something that really informs Marrageku's work since relocating more than 21 years ago. So I look to home, I'm missing it. I've been away for about a week and it's already hard to look and not think about fishing.
So I'm Rachel Swain. I was born on the lands of the Ngai Tahu, which you see here in the South Island of Aotearoa. I'm a Pakeha of Scottish, Irish and English descent. And thanks, Nathan, for talking us through positionality, because as a settler researcher and artist, I very much like to acknowledge my own positionality. I think to leave whiteness unspecified assumes it's a kind of neutral baseline of some description. So I really like to acknowledge my Anglo-Pakeha heritage and also the country I grew up on as a visitor to as a young settler, swimming in this river, the Waimakariri River, and growing up in the rugged landscapes of the South Island of Aotearoa. My time spent up and down this river really taught me the respect for weather, changing weather, and particularly these braided rivers where some of the tributaries run under the greywacke, the beautiful gravel from that area. Some of them are unseen. And every now and then you see the river in a flood flow bank to bank as a kind of combined force. So this river has been a big metaphor in my own life as a visitor to that place. I often think of the primary forces of my own education that were very strong for me growing up in Aotearoa as the work of the Māori visual artists coming from Māori literature, and also that Māori activists in the 80s and 90s in Aotearoa. And coming to Australia, navigating the shifts in my position from an immigrant Pakeha to having the great privilege to work for several years on Gunwinku country as a Bullanda up there, and then also the shifts again as a Garia in the Kimberley, working now there with Dahlia for 21 years as of this year. These shifts in my position and my work as a settler and visitor of those places are very specific to those contexts. So speaking today as co-artistic director of Marrageku with Dahlia, we like to acknowledge always that we're grateful for the generosity and support of the custodians and cultural leaders and the artists from across the Kimberley language groups who hold Maragaku in its cultural home there in Yarru, Buru and Broome on the northwest coast. We especially honour the hard work and tenacity of all peoples of the Kimberley who've fought for country since early invasion. The works that we'll be talking about today were created on the lands of the Yarru and the Bardi people in northwestern Australia, the lands of the Gadigal here in Sydney, and also the lands of the Jubia Kapume in New Caledonia, where we've also worked across 20 years.
This year is 30 years since our first work, Mimi, premiered in Perth Festival in 1996. We acknowledge the Gunwinku artists who watched over our early experimental processes that brought together several art movements. The imagery and stories of Gunwinku rock art, the site-specific visual and physical theatre of the 90s, the first choreographers from NAISDA, and the video art of the Central Desert Media Associations. These early collaborative processes were forged from the necessities of finding ways to meet each other as artists from a range of Indigenous nations and a range of diverse settler backgrounds, and to communicate with the equally diverse audiences we toured to around the country and around the world. Maragaku was born from this alchemy, from the embodied labour and deep socio-cultural negotiations fundamental to creating and performing Mimi, guided by and performed with Gunwinku custodians of land, story, dance, painting, song and music. Although we didn't have the words for it back then, we now describe this as Indigenous governed interculturalism. Today, we are a bi-coastal company proud to create work in Maragaku's cultural home of Broome and Yarru Buru, and also here on the lands of the Gadigal in Sydney. Broome's Indigenous Asian histories, born of 100 years of the pearl shell industry, now underpin our intercultural investigations of local and global issues. Throughout all stages of the company's life, we have enjoyed the dynamic of working across remote and urban dance contexts. This continues in our role as a resident company at Carriage Works here in Gadigal land, where we are working this month on a new project, Nguragabu. Here, the technical ambitions of our works can be realised and our growing intersectional collaborations are connected to diverse communities.
And this mob here that were in that last slide is who we're working with in Carriage Works at the moment and where we just came from this morning. So from our early work in West Arnhem Land to today, the realities of colonial aftermaths for Indigenous communities and for Indigenous settler relations underpin our daily working life as an intercultural company. We see our work as a demonstration of the possibilities of Makarrata. As early as the 70s, the Yolngu people shared the concept of Makarrata with the nation as the work of coming together after a struggle to negotiate pathways to resolve differences. Like our intercultural practice, it requires listening and hearing, truth-telling and restitution. For us, creative practice carries this purpose: to research, stage and share Makarrata through choreo-political truth-telling and the work it takes to meet each other on contested land. After 30 years of Indigenous-governed intercultural practice, we feel the responsibility of applying our collaborative methodologies to embody and visualise urgent questions that we cannot ignore. This artistic and cultural practice is born from building meaningful connections with large groups of diverse artists from communities who live through these day-to-day realities, and that work and visitors who visit those places to investigate these issues in dialogue with custodians of the lands that we work upon. To acknowledge the contested land that we work upon is to acknowledge our own position as guest to or host of the country where the work is made. It's also to position our artistic practice in relational frameworks between dance and the land it is danced on and the custodians who've cared for that place for millennia. For us as co-facilitators of these devised processes, these meetings of peoples, place and practices open complex questions to be embodied and staged in live performance. Or, in the words of Auntie Di Appleby, speaking to the participants of one of our research labs up there in Yarraburu in 2022, she said, "First you have country, then you have us, the Yawuru custodians, and then you dream." So these frameworks of Makarrata, of contested land, of the host and guest relationscapes, and the acknowledgement that everyone has a story, together have underpinned all our major works across the last decade. Each production has begun out of a responsiveness to deeply felt issues facing specific communities, and in each case we've worked in collaboration through practice-led research laboratories to interrogate the issues from local and intersecting perspectives, and then to do the work of artists, to dream.
This has included our current touring work, Cut the Sky, which premiered in 2015 and was created in dialogue with Yawuru, Bunuba and Yigana custodians of the Kimberley region in response to debates over the proposed offshore gas hub planned at Walmerine, James Price's Point. Cut the Sky was created to evoke and embody conflicting conceptions of land, mineral resources, climate justice and protest movements. This year, we completed a remix version of the work in response to 10 years of accelerated climate change. Le Dernier Appel was created on the lands of Jubier Kapumei in Kanaki, New Caledonia, and here on Gadigal, through our long-term partnership with Sante Jean-Marie Thibau Numia. The co-production embodies the anguish and frustrations expressed by communities facing debates on independence or treaty and asks what happens the day after. The work premiered in 2018 on the eve of the first of the 3 referendums on independence with France and could be seen as a portent to the accumulated rage expressed by the younger generations last year.
This body of work continued with Jorungunganga to stage the prison of the mind of Australia, interrogating our nation's brutal incarceration of First Peoples and considering it as a linked scenario to our locking up of refugees in offshore detention. Jorungunanga has toured to major arts festivals in Europe in 2022, and like all of our works, it has also toured throughout remote Indigenous communities in northwestern Australia. The arts are a mode of creative and cultural research, are highly mobile and can reach across borders of many kinds. Each of these works could be thought of as that which remains following multimodal research encounters between artists and artistic practices, country and custodians. This sometimes invisible archive of cultural, societal, political forces are felt, remembered, dreamt or documented by individuals and intersecting communities can be understood as a great midden of experience that can be reactivated through collaborative artistic practice.
A midden could be described as a rubbish heap in some languages, but the midden sites I know of in my country show evidence of the layers of memory deep into the sand of where my ancestors gathered over generations, eating the abundant food sources provided by country over the many cycles of the 6 seasons. A midden captures the layers of connections and memories between people and place across time. Our performance research practices over this last decade have evolved in response to these situations out of a need to find new methodologies and aesthetics and new ways to work respectfully to investigate, embody, and visualize these intersecting personal, political, historical, cultural, and ancestral events accumulating in a location. This artistic and cultural research is carried out by artists from very remote communities as well as diverse urban contexts. We invest in building long-term connections to other First Peoples communities and other sites of contested land internationally. We also reach out to adjacent fields that we see as sharing our values and ambitions.
So we wanted to finish by telling you a little bit about Nguragabu, which we're currently in development with. And this idea of reaching across borders to where there are shared values, but not necessarily an obvious connection, is very much embedded in this work. And in the project, in fact, that we're working with some landscape architects, or they call themselves landscape futurists, in the kind of work to find what it means to make a work of speculative futurism around country, because we start from the point of view of country and custodians with our practice, and so do landscape architects. So Nguragabu is, in Yaru language, means from the last night, and can mean what is to come next, what will emerge after the darkest night that is now looming on all our horizons. Nguragabu is a provocation performed as a continuously evolving procession, inspired by the survival of those who've already faced end times. Taking a deep dive into Indigenous and allied futurisms, we look beyond the looming climate catastrophe and its seemingly inevitable aftermaths of massive border disruptions, war, and displacement, to envisage a new world order born of relocation, adaptation, and repair in the face of volatile change.
We are working with an extraordinary cast, building connections across diverse Indigenous and diasporic communities in Australia, Southeast Asia, and Melanesia. The cast and cultural team includes saltwater and freshwater peoples who are now facing dire warnings of heat and flooding. Together with our long-term dramaturgical partners, Yaru leader my pop, Patrick Dodson, and Belgian dance dramaturg Hildegard de Weiss, and in dialogue with Yaru and Baidi custodians, we are exploring possibilities of radical transformation, from interspecies relationality to neurobiological augmented machine learning, and from Indigenous frameworks of responsiveness and protection to the dismantling power of gender diversities. Audiences will be visually immersed in the oscillations of Northwest Australia's land and sea country, seated within a spectacular petrified mangrove forest designed by Malay-Australian visual artist Abdul Rahman Abdullah. The parade of survival, resistance, and repair unfolds through past, future times to remember the possibilities of transformation and repair at the precipice of survival. We were going to show you some of the footage, but we will close instead because we're running out of time.
So, as this is our first time speaking as part of the Australian Academy of the Humanities, we wanted to offer these little snapshots into performance research and what that means to us as embodiments of country and community, politics and culture, and the ceaseless struggles for Makarrata. This work produces insurgent aesthetics and indigenises creative research processes to remobilise the purpose and the priorities of performance and its role in cultural diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for those presentations. I think what a great way to start off the Symposium on Humanities and Creative Practice. What's really striking to me across the three of your works is the emphasis on change and openness to things shifting and moving all the time. Nothing's locked down, and I think that's a really strong and essential part of creativity. And, you know, of course, what's coming across really profoundly in all of your presentations is cultural pride and assertion. Very positive kind of way of approaching all of the different ways that you're doing things through dress, through material culture, and through performance. So we do have some time for questions. And there is a roving mic, so ask away. Yes, Stephen.
Thanks everyone. Terrific panel. My question's about the kind of balance between the power of heritage and retaining heritage, but also the futurism that you spoke about, the speculative futurism, which seems to me a newer development. So if anybody would like to comment on the relative importance of past and future.
It's one of a big discussion that we're having with the creative team, and you know, in all things cultural, we think of things as cyclical and all forever connected. So things of the past are of the present and of the future forever and always. So when we think about Bugarigara or creation time and how it exists today, not just of a long time ago. So I guess the coming to terms with what is predicted or what is speculated for the future from the different perspectives that, you know, we're lucky enough to have so many perspectives in the room feeding into the conversation and the imaginary, including people who use data to make those, you know, these landscape futurists who are actually using data from pre-colonial, you know, pictures of country to what it might look like in 5,000 years or more, and coming to terms with that, with your own worldview on how you understand change is, yeah, it's an everyday question actually, but one that we keep coming back to, cycles of this past, present and future time is always together.
No, no, I just completely agree. Like, you know, with the yarns, it's like creation's always happening, and as you're saying, life is cyclical. I think, you know, I am my ancestors, but I'm also my descendants. So, like, you know, like I think I think futurism is a thing that mob have been always doing. Like, I think it is like it's just creating, but also harkening back to the past. Like, you know, so yeah, I think it's. But I do know that a lot of mob in yarning earlier this year we had a symposium at the Powerhouse, a First Nations symposium about time, because the Powerhouse has this. The Sydney Observatory has this thing called the time ball that used to drop at 1 p.m. every day, which the old ships would. That's how they would set their clocks, was the time ball dropping at 1 p.m. And yarn, we got a lot of mob to yarn there, and there was, you know, Fijian sci-fi writer Gina Cole was there, and she was just like, you know, I think it was just the way to sort of tell, the futurism was just a way to tell our stories. Like, she's just like, I just feel like we're seafarers on the ocean, so we're seafarers in the sky, and some people might say that's science fiction, but it's like, she's like, that's kind of just part of our stories, yeah. So I'm rambling.
Do we have any other questions?
Dahlia's dobbing me in. Oh, sorry. Or just that we often make a work in kind of responsiveness to other works or other touchstones, and we've been reading Alexis Wright's work very, very closely. That was also her instructions to us, to read it very closely, and we're very captivated by the way her futurism is Indigenous realism. You know, it is the reality, and that, you know, that's partially why we're working with the landscape futurists, so that we can be exploring a speculative future that has the reality of political histories and cultural histories embedded in it. We went earlier this week out to the south side of Gamay and to visit the work of the elder that welcomed us.
and there are statements by the Guiyagal people about the impact of the smallpox. And it was, you know, there was the apocalypse there. The apocalypse already happened at the start of colonisation there. This is already the future now, the post-apocalypse world that First Peoples have been living in this country since colonisation. So it's another way to think of, for who is the future, the future.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Peter Baxter. I'm from London, England. I'm here to research the British Empire exhibition and Australia's presence at that exhibition in 1924 and 1925. I'm a fellow librarian, and we did some work in the community in which the exhibition was held, which is Wembley Stadium. It's the reason why Wembley Stadium is the venue for popular culture and sport today. But my question is probably to Nathan, but anyone can answer it. And it's around your commitment to policy, from policyholders, and in London it's the local authority. I guess here it's your local authority, like not the state authority, but the smaller local authority, and their commitment to the work that you do in community, whether that's contemporary collecting, and whether it's just lip service. So we might say how great the work is, but once the funding's run out, it's up to you to go and get some more funding and prove to us it's worth, and that continuous effort that we will have to do in the culture sector. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is tricky. Like, you know, I work. The work I do is for the state government, so it has to align with also the powerhouse, what the powerhouse wants to do. And there is things where what community want to do, you know, might misalign, or also too, like a lot of things that community want to do take time. And I think actually that's one of the bigger resources that that we have to sort of argue up for more, is just the time to think, the time to respond, time to create, because I think, you know, we're funded like from July to June, you know, and that's how funding structures work. And they want to wrap things up within a financial year or another financial year. But it's like the thing with the One project that I showed today, that took like that just happens over like 5 years of just constant sort of yarning, and it just takes time. And but you know, I guess like that's what my role is to sort of try to make the institution understand why it's important, and to, I also think, because my role is identified, I also believe that that role means that it should be to create change within an organisation for mob, and also too for the organisation to also understand that because my role is identified, that I am mob first, institution second. I will try my best to make sure the things align, but at the end of the day, that's what my focus is. So I guess it's like trying to do that, and to I guess to talk about like the hollowness is, so I guess like point that out when it is, like just to sort of say, because you know, like the national art strategy says First Nations first. So it's one of the things we often say to like our bosses is like, they say First Nations first, this is what First Nations first means. And yeah, and so I guess, but there's only so much you can do. You can point out the hypocrisy, but then you know, they got to do something.
Thank you very much. I'm conveying an online question we have from one of our fellows who's tapping into the webinar, Linda Barwick, and she's asked a question to Nathan, but I think too it might be that Dahlia wants to comment too. I know you mentioned working in the digital space as well. The question is, Nathan, would you care to comment on how you see a relationship between yarning and metadata in your work?
Yeah, it's actually one of the things I'm trying. One of the things I really want to do. The Powerhouse uses a system called EMU. It's a very prominent museum database, and that's where we record all our metadata. I would love, I'm sure Linda's actually already working on this as herself. I would like to be able to embed oral. I would like to have audio be like, because a lot of time when we, if I ask Mob to write like 150 words on this object, what does it mean to you? They'll do it, but like it'd be heaps easier just to sort of sit them down with the object and sort of ask them to their face and then sort of tell you. And I would love to. We do capture oral histories, and maybe digitally we can, you know, connect them a bit better. But I actually love the audio just to be just straight up embedded in the record. So when you're doing a collection search, so say if you're searching for like this shirt, you'd get like one of Uncle's quotes, just like you could hear it, like rather than just sort of read it. Yeah.
My name's Anne Stephen. I was the non-Indigenous curator 25 years ago who went out with Mervyn Bishop to return the Whalewan photos and to speak to the community about how they wanted to deal with them. And we ended up, as you probably know, leaving a set of them with the Quambone Primary School, and we published various versions of that journey in a number of different ways. And we used the Indigenous artist, to design the publication. But I was just wondering, what decision have you come to? Are you putting them back online?
Yes. So also too, so basically, as I was saying, we went back out to community, and we were saying like some of the community like are super proud of those photos and want them out in public. Some community were a bit antsy, but there was that were only a small minority, and there was some community that were a bit a bit worried about how they're used, but we're also basically like the cat's out of the bag. But also talking about that Quambone school, that's actually really cool. Like that's actually a tourist destination now because of those photos. I've actually just spoke to a community group. The community group that I'm working with is actually establishing their own cultural centre, and they're going to take the Quambone school photos there because the school is like not built to be a tourist destination, like because people who come into the town like to see the photos, but everyone that has to go in there has to have a working with children's check and has to sign in, so they sign in. But yeah, I think no, because like the work you did and Joe Flick as well, Steve Miller, it's incredible work, and it's like pretty forward thinking for the powerhouse at the time. But yeah, I guess like communities like main issues was not just the photos, it was just how they were like talked about with other people. Like they talk about Wawan people as being, I guess, like people would say, this is what Wawan people used to do. Or like with the markings on the men on the ground, they'd be like, these mysterious markings, and the community were like, no, they're not mysterious. Like we know what they are, but you know, in the history they weren't recorded. So yeah, but those yeah, I think it was an interesting yarn to have, because there was some community that were like you know, like they were the descendants, like they were not direct descendants, they were like the son of someone that you like interviewed, and they just had, it was like a generational shift where they had just a completely different perspective on it, where they were like, you know, Mum said it was cool, but I don't think it was Mum's decision, because it's like mostly men's business. So it was interesting, but we're going to put them where that's our goal, is actually to, they're not online at the moment. We're actually going to publish we're doing, I guess, like a revamp of the Sharing the Wawan story, digital version online with all the new photographs and the old photographs. And so when we publish them, we're going to put the old photographs back online on Collection Search. They're still like the metadata is still available on collection search, and if any community requests it, we'll always like, you know, give them digital copies if they need it. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, it's Louise Edwards. I'm also on the council. I've got a question for Trina, and I'm wondering if, because you're like wearing, you know, you're wearing the gear, is there a plan, and you're researching the clothing that's actually being used and worn and moving through country and moving through city and moving, you know, you're doing it now. Are you going to archive this in the way that, say, someone like Nathan would be able to then use in the future? What's you're going to be identifying the descendants and the ancestors? Like, how is your fashion sense of culture going to then transfer to an archive sense?
Yeah, good question. I haven't spoken to Nathan about this particular research, but we yarn about some other forms around fashion design. And how I can contribute with some other collaborators. In terms of this research, I think it'd be really important to have an exhibition. Not something that I need to be involved in, but I think it would be amazing if someone could create an exhibition that pulled together all different types, because a lot of it is around skin cloaks and adornment, or there's been ones in Queensland around T-shirts. So all different small little, not small, but exhibitions that focus on specific topics and themes within this, but there really needs to be one that looks at the entire history. And that has happened before in Canada, and so I've seen beautiful images of clothes before colonisation from, you know, and then 1900s and 1800s up until today, and so you can really see the history of that. So I think that's a good step, and I would love to be a part of it, but I think someone else could take on the... Oh.
Thanks, I hope so. Trina, I have a question for you. I loved your presentation. I would really love to hear about your philosophies on the rise of the fibre of the fashion that we wear every day is, you know, shifting more and more to plastics, polyesters. What are your philosophies on the textures and the fibres that we use, especially in First Nations fashion, but also in, you know, the fashion we wear every day, and how has that shifted recently?
Yeah, in First Nations fashion, there's a movement around sustainable design. So a lot of the designers use sustainable materials, or they use secondhand garments. There are, of course, some designers who don't. They might, you know, produce on T-shirts that don't follow that, but a lot of them do, and it's a really big philosophy for them to engage in sustainable practices that honour country and connect with country in that way. So the movement's just going to increase more with those materials, because it's a really important part of our culture to give back to the environment and take care of environment and country. So, yeah.
I was planning to sit in the audience and take copious notes. I sat here taking notes. There's so much to think about. Your talks all, you know, presented so much food for thought. It's hard for me to kind of come down onto one point, but I think one of the things that really excited me about your panel collectively is the work that you do in your practice and your research in terms of interaction with people. And at the time that we're really thinking about, you know, what are humanities good for and why do we need humanities, I'm just thinking that it must be so rewarding for you, for your interactions with the people that you're, you know, Trina, that you're talking to about their clothing, and Nathan, you're talking to about the material culture and their heritage, and the designing of the dances and the performance and where it's got to come from. Like, that must be so rich, because those people that you're talking with are like getting sparked off. So I just think it's it really shows how important creative arts are for the humanities and for our, broader society. Don't know if you want to comment on that itself.
With only 1 minute left, everything for us to be able to, walk the walk, talk the talk, be who we authentically are, is to create these connections with people, respectful communication, and connecting and listening, deep listening to one another's stories, so that you can actually make genuine connections with people to be able to, preparing the space and the soil for growth is one, like I heard Nathan speaking about a project that takes a long time, and I'm sure Trina's, it's long journeys. Every production we've made over 30 years takes at least 3 years to even have the conversations and explorations. So things take time, and to give time to our relationships means that all the stomachs are growling, means that you give value to it and respect and honouring relationship.
Well, it has been my absolute privilege to chair this panel, and thank you for being patient with me. And thank you, everyone, for coming to hear such a great panel. Let's give them a round of applause, and then...